Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Rogue Deck Chronicles. I am Dean, and I have Devin with me today.
Hey guys, hope everyone had a, a very eventful Pokemon weekend, but for pretty much anyone around the world.
And even keep going on now, like Happy Pokemon Day. As this is released, it will be Pokemon Day. We're recording a little earlier, so excuse us for not being able to talk about any of the Pokemon Day news. We'll pick up on that next week. But yeah, just even already, there's been a lot of exciting things and a lot of leaks going on. I'm trying not to fully pay attention to them, but I know something interesting happened with Go today with the time research and something
Yeah, there was
is
a
going
bug.
on.
There was a bug affecting the rollout of the Road to Unova raid time to research, and then with the pay ticket on the raid ticket. So Niantic, as Niantic does, gave everyone 11 mythical and legendary checks for free. And some of
Yeah,
us got none, and some of us got four shinies.
yeah. I wasn't sure what was going on. Like, I opened up my thing. I'm like, why do I have all these completed research stats? I didn't pay for it. So I just
So
kept on
yeah,
picking them. And my first one, I'm like, oh, this is Tracheon. This is a shiny. The second one, oh, this is another shiny. Third one wasn't. And then the fourth, and I'm like, wait, I just got a bunch of shinies. Is this supposed to happen? Because I don't follow
they were
Pokemon Go at
they were
all.
boosted shinies. They were 1 in 20 checks, just like you would get them out of a raid. Um, it's just what like it was. There was just a bug that happened that affect progression. So Niantic, as they always do, is when there's a bug that affects progression, even if it's a small population of the player base, they end up giving the entire player base like a reward. And if you had the raid ticket, which was a $4.99 add-on to the Road to Unova week, you got that ticket auto completed as well, so you would have got double the checks. So that was just Niantic doing Niantic things. Like this week is one of Niantic's biggest weeks. Go Tour Unova is this weekend, which is the second biggest event every year behind Go Fest, which is the summer. So Niantic had a save face on that one. I will straight out tell you that. Everyone is always looking at Niantic for this, and they're about to sell Pokemon Go. For those who do not know the news, they're evaluating Pokemon Go gaming division at $3.5 billion, and the prospective buyer is the Public Investment Fund, and that is a controversial sale. That's a topic that a lot of Pokemon Go players are interested in and been talking about. Um, the very, I would say, the Pokemon related part of that is that the Public Investment Fund is actually a shareholder of Pokemon International themselves. So this is a partner that Pokemon has done business with in the past. So this is not someone that Pokemon is not familiar with. So
So
this
they
would
vetted
be,
them essentially already.
I mean, they own like 7%. They have a 7% stake in Nintendo or Pokemon's shares. So it's not as controversial as people think it is. As Pokemon's not going to probably do like a hard ban or anything like that. But again, there are bigger entities where neither you nor I can understand big business like that. We're talking $1 billion transaction. I'm sure it's vetted properly through all the proper channels. Niantic, Pokemon, Nintendo, they have lawyers who specialize in this, so I wouldn't worry.
Yeah, and I didn't know that was happening, but like I said, I don't follow Pokemon Go. I am very casual on it. I open it up to do my daily capture and my daily Pokestop because where I work, there's a couple Pokestops from my where I'm sitting, and I just saw that. It was a nice surprise. So good morning to me.
Yeah, I got that. You sent me the text. I'm like, why is my phone blowing up? And I see I had to wait to a red light. I'm like, oh, okay. Kristen got
Yeah.
a shiny Virizion out of that, and I'm like, I didn't get any. I was like, all right,
Okay, so she got the one
whatever.
I didn't get.
Yeah, she got a shiny Virizion. I got a shiny Virizion from raids a previous day. We went raiding, and I got no shinies from the raiding, but I did like a random remote raid, and I get it. And I'm like, okay, one less one for the living decks. Let's go.
Yep. But we're not a Pokemon Go podcast. We love that, but we're here to talk about the trading card game. So, Devin,
Hmm.
have you done anything with the trading card game, or you have any cool projects coming up with the trading card game?
I mean, I did the Rogue Deck of the Week this weekend. Like, I didn't get a chance to watch EOIC. I was testing. I was doing a couple other projects. So I'm excited to talk about the Deck of the Week later in this episode, later in the conversation. And that was really my focus from a trading card game perspective, was really just digging into that list, that 60. And like I said, I'm kind of excited to talk about and showcase it a little bit more.
Awesome. Yeah, I know we've been enjoying this deck building series. I went to a Pokemon Day celebration yesterday at one of my local card shops. It was more just a bunch of us getting together and just playing, and then we had a raffle. We really encourage y'all to go to one of these if you can. I know this is coming out on the Thursday, but if you have a couple days and if you have a shop nearby, I would definitely go out. These events are really fun. Pokemon has supported the leagues really well with this, especially this year. But yeah, it was fun. I played a couple of my decks. I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to play for my challenge tomorrow. And then yeah, I did watch EUIC. It was very exciting seeing all the really the innovations from decks that we typically see, um, and how they change to match what EUIC or what they expect for the meta share to be for EUIC. So it was really cool to see that. And yeah, I guess we can just go ahead and talk about that tournament, which happened last weekend, which was won by the Japanese player Ryuki Okada playing Cloth Terrapagos. So my man Cloth won a tournament, and not just a tournament, an IC at that.
I was surprised it took you 7 minutes to brag about that, to be honest with you. I know you were blowing up the Discord channels that we were in about the deck and about the matchups, and you were glowing all weekend about it. And I know this is your pet deck. I know this is something you've been definitely piloting since day one. Sometimes I would say even sooner than some of the other players here. So it was very cool to kind of see this deck. I mean, right now you would even argue, right? This is a top tier deck. It's a meta contender. This isn't considered meme territory anymore. So it's definitely evolved over the time
Mhm.
that you've been even playing it. But I think you would argue this is the breakout moment for the deck. You really can't do any better than other than winning worlds with this type of deck.
Yeah, and that's not going to happen. Rotation will happen in 2 months, and this deck will totally die with it. Has too many pieces that will rotate out. I know there's some decks that will just do like the Brute Bonnet and the Trapagos and still keep the poison package,
Mm-hmm.
but losing the Radiant Sneasler is very important, very important. But that's a whole nother discussion. We can talk about the the list that Ryuki piloted, which was very different than what we normally see with a cloth Terrapagos. Obviously, it has the most of the skeleton of what we expect to see. I will say, one of the big changes in his list that we don't necessarily see, but it does make sense, is the Munkidori. So he
I
does
was
play the one Munkidori, one Darkness
I
Energy.
was gonna ask, like, I saw the darkness energy and I looked up and I saw the monkey dory. I'm like, okay, I can see the synergy. Like, obviously you want that. I wasn't sure how many people really go that route.
Honestly, it was one of those decks that people talk about, but most decks don't play it. And in the interview he had, he actually admitted, it's like, hey, this is just something I'm used to being a Japanese player. Everyone plays Monkey Dory, so I did it. If you watch any of his stream matches, it had no effect in any of his games. He didn't play it down. I think one game he started it, and that was the only reason why it was on his board. He didn't need it for those matches, but I can see how it can manipulate your damage because with cloth, you're max at 240.
Mm-hmm.
So if you need to hit that 260, 270 range, you can use Monkey Dory to get those KOs on the Goldango versus using the Trap Ghost and still keep a single prize trade there versus having a two prize liability. Um, I think it helps with your math for Lugia. I'm not totally positive, but I know you hit for weakness with Lugia. So having that 30 damage from the Monkey Dory does help with that. It negates the sorry, you're hitting for resistance. So it
Mm-hmm.
helps negate the resistance with that too, so you can hit your numbers even more consistently. Um, but I would say if you're gonna take Ryuki's list and if you're gonna cut something, I'd say those two cards are the first two to consider because granted, I'm not a top tier player by any means, but I play this deck more than enough. You can get away without it. It's a nice tech, but it's not what makes or break a lot of your matchups.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of damage fixing in this deck. Even with some of the tech cards in here, like like you said, the Munkidori, the Kyrian, like I feel like that card is really more of a switch card than a damage fixer. So you just
Yeah,
kind of go with like
it
your
does
flat
both
numbers.
too. So, and then another interesting change that he has is that he plays 4 switch cards.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot for that deck, and I play 3 in mine. Spoiler alert to whoever is going to the challenge and may play this tomorrow. You're getting a glimpse of what my deck is like. But I I usually play 3 switch cards, and that's usually on the higher end. A lot of these decks only play 2. So the fact that he's playing 4, he's either teching for the stall matchup, or he's just trying to help with healing and getting cards in and out just in case if the Latias EX gets knocked out.
I would say I think the stall techs are definitely warranted. If you look at the top 16, there's 3 Snorlax stall in the top 16. So I
With 2
think
of
it
them being in the top 8.
Yeah, so I think it was a meta call of just wanting to be able to switch his Pokemon out. And again, I think that
Mhm,
goes back to some more of the cards, like the one-off Carrion. I think that's a switch card, right? It's your supporter, so if you're item locked, you still can switch using that supporter for turn. So I think he
mhm.
was very, very afraid of Snorlax, and he definitely built his deck to counter that fear.
Yeah, because typically you have the Petron EX for your switching options to combat the stall matchup. Because it's an interesting progression of the cloth deck. It went from being a unfavorable matchup against stall to now being super favorable with having all these switches. Because if you can switch, you get around Snorlax's ability.
Yeah.
So it's been a nice progression of how decks innovate towards what they see in the meta.
Hmm.
But what Cloth didn't go against Control in the final match. It went against the big boy Dragapult. And it was piloted by none other than Natalie Miller. So if you know who this player is, she is a phenomenal Australian player, probably the best Australian player, if not one of the best players, period. She understands the game like no one else, and she's whenever she shows up to tournaments, it's top 16 or bust. She rarely gets out of day 2, and when she does very well for herself.
Yeah, no, she's a very accomplished player. She is part of like that core in Oceania that tests and really is doing their best to showcase the Oceania um the TCG scene. I'm fairly certain she is a testing partner of Henry Brand, former world champion, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's her, Brent, James Cox, which is another top 8 player at this tournament. Practically any good Australian player is in that testing group. And you're like, well, okay, that's one testing group, but the problem is like you have a lot of the best of the best in that testing group. Like you have a former world champion, Brand. You have the top ranked player for the last 2 years, Brent Tonneson. You have one of the top players that consistently does well in tournaments, Natalie Miller. Like when you have a testing group of that high caliber, you're going to do well in tournaments. And whenever you hear different podcasts, like, oh, who do you think is going to win? They always say, like, it has to be an Australian. If not, they're going to be in the top 4. That's how strong that testing group is.
Hmm. I mean, iron sharpens iron, right? And that's a testing group philosophy. Obviously, as a group, you guys will elevate yourselves, but on top of that, sometimes you just have to put yourself in a group of just people who think a little differently, and they will push you, and you will push them, and you guys see the game very differently. And obviously, the higher end players see the game very differently than you or I even do. because of their
Mhm.
experience and their knowledge base. So it's always is not that's not a critique. Obviously, you want to practice with people that'll make you better, and that's exactly what happens.
Exactly. But we look at her list. She came in with Dragapult Dusknoir, and it's a traditional list. I would say the only different thing about her list compared to most Dragapult lists is that she does the 3-2-1 line for the Duskull, Dusclops, Dusknoir. So only really having the one Dusknoir and having two of the Dusclopses, which is really smart in this format because of item lock. It's very hard to get to Dusknoir nowadays, but if you can get away with just manually evolving and using Dusclops, and even the 50 from its Curse Blast can mean a lot for your damage manipulation and prize mapping.
Oh yeah, it's this whole deck is about placing damage counters, so it just makes sense to have it. I think, like you said, the biggest difference is how thin the tail end of the stage two portion of that line is. Where I think the Dusclops fixes enough maps so you don't ever have to rely on the Dust and the Water. Where
Mhm.
13 versus 5, like yeah, the 8 damage counters does matter a little bit, but maybe not enough for you to really try to lean into it as hard as maybe some other players will.
And if you think about it, like, we're so reliant on the Pheasantipity. So if you take out that a Pokemon using the Dusknoir, you open up the flip the script ability for your opponent on their next turn. Versus if you just place the damage counters and don't even take a knockout and just play that long spread game, you're you're restricting important draw that your opponent can have.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really like a lot of players will just go for like, I need to get all my prize cards. I'm just going to go for the KO, and it's really the mature mind, someone that's been playing the game a while, will take the slower route and really be methodical of when they do the how they spread their damage out. And you saw that with Natalie and all her stream matches. Like, she knows this deck, she knows this meta, and she played this deck very, very well.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell she knows the deck. You can tell she knows the meta, like the matchups, the deck type. Like it goes into the top players will play top decks, but really good players will master top decks. And I think that's
Hmm.
what her kind of her route to the finals really shows. Because I think her route to the finals is a little harder um, than the other route, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't know who they played going into the in the quarterfinals, because this was a clean top eight. There was no asymmetrical cut with this tournament. But you mentioned talk like the top players playing the top decks. I want to go into Xander Perot, who is from one of the biggest American testing groups, playing
Mm-hmm.
Godango. And this list, if you look at it, oh, I pressed the wrong thing. One, two, three, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 players top EYC with this list. And that's all one testing group with
Yeah, so this deck
6 of
list was
them
played
being
by
top
Xander,
64.
Raul, Grant, Isaiah, John. Yeah, this testing group is very notable. I am looking at all this. And we say this group, they played the same 60.
Yeah.
So 3rd, 28th, 30th, 42nd, 55, 58. Yeah. So,
This group earned a lot of money this weekend,
yeah.
for sure. Playing this version of Godango, and that's what I was talking about earlier, was how and the innovation part of going to these big tournaments. The one thing that's really missing from this deck is that there's no Palkia. There's no backup attacker. It's straight Goldango. So what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, 4-4 of your main attacker, I think that's more of a consistency engine approach where you don't go for type matchup diversity or even just a backup strategy diversity. You just lean into the main strategy. In this
Mhm.
case, it's make it rain and just legitimately make it rain. So
Mhm.
I think when it comes to deck building and you want to go consistent, you just want to just lean into your strategy and it's a make or break. This is not a bad way to go into deck building. It's either you boom or bust, and they fine tuned it to where not only Xander had a good run, but a whole bunch of other players had a good run with this deck. So I think their testing and their them able to fine tune this 60 showed how much just leaning into a central strategy can do.
Yeah, and their testing group is much bigger than those who made day 2. Like,
Mm-hmm.
when you can convince a two-time regional champion like Henry Chow to switch off, a deck that came in really strong to play this list, there has to be something with this list. Like, Henry Chow played Goldango. I don't believe he made day 2, but, like, if you can convince these top players, you get off something that they're super comfortable with, there must be a very good reason. And you saw, like, Xander Pero went undefeated. I believe he went 10-03
Mm-hmm.
into top cut, being top seed, and getting into top 4, ultimately losing to Ryuki in the semifinals, which Goldango is a hard matchup, or Cloth is a hard matchup for Goldango because of how it can manipulate its damage. Which, if you want to go back to that stream game, you can see how that matchup is. But yeah, like playing 4-4, going straight, being a little tanky because you're 260, not a lot. You're not getting one shot by a lot of things. There isn't a lot of fire decks out there, so you're not really worrying about weakness. Yeah, it was a strong deck when he was on stream. He piloted it really well, and it was very enjoyable to watch. So all you Goldango fans out there, you have been redeemed. You have been heard, and this tournament showed how strong that deck is, and a lot of people wrote it off. They didn't even consider it as a contender.
And really, like if you look at the list, like I'm just kind of perusing through the list, right? It's
Mhm.
fairly rotation proof.
I The only thing you lose is Pokestop, I think. Oh, lots of vacuum.
Yeah, you lose like I would say it's Pokestop, Lost Vacuum, Hisui, and Heavy Ball, but that just means you find a different stadium. You just learn how to, and then obviously Radiant Greninja. But I think there'll just be you just find another engine when it comes to Radiant Greninja. I don't think Radiant Greninja is that strong where it is this deck falls off when it comes to rotation. It's I think Radiant Greninja is something you can easily find a way to just do more discard synergy.
Yeah.
Pokestop, more discard synergy. And then Hisuian Heavy Ball is really just a consistency factor where you just want to look into your prizes. So I think if this is if you are wanting a deck that is fairly long term, this might be a deck for you.
Yeah, and even then, there is some innovation with this deck. There was another deck that got it made day 2. I don't know where it landed. Oh, top 32 at 19th place, and it ran the 1-1 scissor line. So if you can't get your Godangles out, and if you're going against a deck that has a lot of abilities, that scissor was a very good one prize attacker for you, because it you can hit 310 if every one of your opponent's Pokemon has an ability, which I've done in the past. I used to play a Scizor deck, and when he can do that, it feels awesome.
Yeah, I mean, whenever those baby techs work and they make you feel really good, it's always a good call, and especially when they're single prize, right? It's just an easier feel good moment for any type of deck building for sure.
Yeah, and then there was a Archaldon list that got 4th place. Other than the usual suspects, let's see what if there's anything interesting that made day 2. There was a Greninja player that made day 2 with the Greninja EX. Hydreigon made day 2. I'm trying to find those lists now. But other than that, it's once again usual suspects, just little innovations here and there with the lists. But you see the Charizards, you see the Archaldons, you see the Miraidons. So
Yeah,
nothing has changed meta
yeah.
wise. It's
I'll
just
say
how you
Hydreigon got
play the meta.
109th. I know you were very high on this deck in the beginning.
Which deck?
Hydreigon.
Yeah. I think it's a good deck. I think it's still missing a lot of pieces, but seeing it consistently get at least one player making day 2 with it, I think it's really cool. Um, the Hydreigon EX has a very nice attack, very cool attack. I actually played against my buddy yesterday playing a deck with Hydreigon EX in it, and once it gets going, it's scary because you
Yeah.
can either go the mill route or you can go for the board white route. So it's like, how do I play around this? There's two very good strategies here.
Yeah, and I think even the mill route, like top 3 cards where you're doing 200 damage, and like there's a lot to have to be afraid of with that first attack.
Oh yeah. So UIC happened. So going forward, we don't have any tournaments this weekend, but there is a major tournament happening in 2 weeks in Vancouver. What do you expect to see from players going to Vancouver? Which keep in mind, rotation's not that far away. So
Yeah,
do you see people innovating and having fun towards until we get to post rotation, or do you think people are still going to keep on what they know, do the nice safe method, and just play what's been working?
I think players are going to cut the difference in that question. Actually, I think there's a lot of decks right now that are rotation proof already. Um, like I think cloth is the exception, where cloth really will be like a victim of rotation. But we've already kind of seen the victims of rotation already fall off, like the Regidracos and like Gardevoir
Mhm.
to a smaller extent. Like Gardevoir's popularity isn't as much as it was. I think a lot of these decks are definitely rotation proof already. So they're going to take the results from EUIC and they're just going to craft their strategies around the top, I would say the top 64 decks, right? You're talking people are going to tech for Cloth. They're going to tech for Dragapult. They're going to tech for Golden Godiva. They're going to tech for Archaeodon. Like they're going to make sure their decks are either that one of those 4 decks or they have favorable matchups. And so it's going to be an evolution piece of it. I don't think a lot of players are worried about rotation anymore. I think that question has solved itself with the new meta. And the last, like, Cloth is going to ride off in the sunset in the next 3 weeks, kind of deal, right?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of players have already done that. And now they're just going to try to fine tune what they can do for the rest of this block up until Journey Together and then evaluate the card pool after that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's going to be a mixture of both. Obviously, those who are trying to go for their world's invite, they're going to stay with the try and true. Maybe a little innovation here and there, but nothing too spicy. Those who either have already locked it up, or just wanting to go and just play for fun, I feel like they're going to try to do something different, something new. Um, it's just hard because we do have a very established meta. Yes, it's a wide meta, but it is established, and there isn't really a lot of new things that we can try to do. Because really, with Prismatic Evolution, when that set came out, um, not a lot changed. We got two new playable cards, but other than that, it's been relatively the same. Yes, the Badoo kind of killed Dragapult. There's no way around that. But even then, Dragapult's still strong. It got top 16 at EUIC, even with the the Badoo counter to it.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see how and if there are innovation and anything unique.
Yeah.
I would like to see maybe an Arceus deck do well at one of its final tournaments before it rotates too. I know there's been this Arceus Firebox deck going around on online right now. Maybe that will have its last time to shine. Maybe we can see that on stream or make day 2 with it. But yeah, it's going to be a lot of the same with maybe a little spice here and there.
Oh yeah. I don't think there's going to be no creativity. I just think that it's just going to be more future planning creativity than
Mhm.
just going out with a bang, right? It's there's going to be that in between. So
Yeah,
it's going to be interesting to see what risks or any that some of the players will take going into Vancouver and then prepping for Atlanta. And honestly, you never know what the players are going to do. EUIC reaction and IC reactions go one of two ways: either nothing changes or everything changes.
exactly. And I'm excited to see how Vancouver turns out, and I'm excited to watch it. So, but yep, that was the UIC, one of the biggest tournaments that we will see this year. One thing we also didn't mention: this is a gigantic tournament,
Oh yeah,
3,200 masters, just masters in the TCG.
gone are the days. Or I still do not comprehend how big these tournaments can get. It's I remember the day where there was 800 people at a tournament, and that was world breaking. We're talking about multiple thousands every single time now.
Yeah, and that's what it maxing out. There was a lot more people that wanted to go to, so we'll see how NEIC shakes up. I know I'm gonna try to go, but as we move on from the majors, the big regionals and ICs, we're we're in the process of learning how to build decks so we can get to the point of playing these big tournaments with our own creation.
Mm-hmm.
So let's continue our deck building series. So as a recap, we've talked about picking an archetype, a main actor for our deck. And then we also talked about the supporting role, the the Pokemon that support our idea to make that archetype really succeed. And then we went into how our resource and resource management and the type of cards, whether it be Pokemon search, different recursion cards, how that can support how we are successful or even unsuccessful, depending on how we draw and the RNG of everything. How does that play? How that play a role in our deck? So, Devin, what is our topic this week with deck building?
Yeah. So now let's talk about the cards that really have restrictions, right? So now the what I wanted to talk about today are supporters, but more specifically are going to be your draw supporters. Because these cards are so powerful, you can only play one of these a turn. So we need to make sure we're utilizing when to play each type of supporter in order to maximize our turn in our deck to make sure we have our timing and our flow perfectly like structured.
Yeah, I think when we build a deck, yes, we need our items, we need our Pokemon, but we also need a way to get the items and get our Pokemon in our hand so we can play them. And the draw support mechanic is the way to do that. And there's so many different cards that we can do that achieve that. I know one of the most common ones we think of is Professor's Research. Or if you want to think in the expanded mode, Professor's Juniper, Sycamore, the card that says discard your hand and draw 7. And that's
Mm-hmm.
been around for so long in the Pokemon trading card game. And it's just so they keep reprinting it to the point where they made a certain card that had that text and then just relabeled it as Research, and you had so many different versions of it.
Yeah, now they're just like not even going to try to reprint the card. They just want to put a different professor on every set.
Yeah, and if with Prismatic Evolution you had that option, every professor got a card like that. So that's really cool. But yeah, when we have the resources, we need a way to get them.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, this card in your hand may feel bad in the moment, but a lot of times it helps you get the resources you need in your discard, draw more so you can utilize the resources in your discard too. So it's more about just refilling your hand. It's also providing a way for you to play the game other than from your hand to the board. You can do discard the board or discard to deck, and it helps open up a lot more possibilities.
Yeah, and one thing I want to emphasize before we really talk about more specific examples of what draw supporters are is that a draw supporter needs to be synergistic with the general strategy of the deck. So if you are a deck like Ancient Box, you're probably going to run a little more Professor's Research than probably another deck that needs to manage your resources a little better because you want to put stuff into the discard pile. Well, Professor's Research is discard your hand, draw 7. That's great. Some other cards would rather shuffle your deck or your hand back into the deck and draw X. So you really want to make sure when you are picking the draw supporters for your deck, it makes sense with the general strategy of the deck and it makes sense with how aggressive the deck wants to be. I'm not saying Professor's Research should not be in every deck. I honestly do think that a deck that doesn't run research is a deck that has a very unique strategy because I think just refilling your hand to 7, regardless of whatever deck you're in, is just too powerful to ignore. But not every deck would want to put 4 of it into it. Like you have to be very aware of what you want to accomplish when picking out your draw supporters for your deck.
Yeah, and in the Pokemon trading card game, that is just so important. Put it in perspective. There's another trading card game that just banned a card because it said draw 3. And that is completely banned because it broke the game and it made it too powerful for their game. Meanwhile, we have cards that make us draw 5, 6, 7, as many as that's on your opponent's bench, as many as on both your benches. Like we have so many ways to draw cards,
Mm-hmm.
and that's like normal for us. So
Yeah.
we want to take advantage of that mechanic that our game provides. And yeah, you're totally right. You need to pick the draw that best supports your deck. So if you're playing an ancient deck, like either Ancient Box, Gouging Fire, well, really those are the main two ancient decks, but you want to play cards like Professor Sada's Professor Sada. It helps you get energy back and then you draw 3. Like it's another way to easily get cards that you need to draw that's not a Pokemon or not a item,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so powerful to set up your board with that draw power of that card.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you mentioned there's other games that ban cards because of draw 3 or draw 2. Like I've seen a video of a Yu-Gi-Oh player reading and I'm gonna reading a card like Hal or like I think the equivalent right now is like Friends of Sinnoh, Friends of Isui, and they're like, draw 3? This is broken. And the Pokemon player went, what are you talking about? No one plays this card. And their relation to that is Pot of Greed is just a draw 2 in Yu-Gi-Oh! And that's been banned and restricted for years. So again, the draw is a very strong aspect of this trading card game, and it's a very unique aspect of this trading card game. We don't have very many wheel-like effects for those who play Magic. Wheel effects are a thing, but they're not as strong as they are in Magic. So comparing us to other games, this is something that a lot of decks in Pokemon specifically really need to master in order to run smoothly.
Exactly. So when it comes to picking the type of draw, what are some factors that you look for personally when you create a deck and need to pick out certain support cards to help you get resources into your hand?
So for me, I the first question I ask myself is how many research do I feel comfortable? When I am building a deck, I start with 3 of anything. And I don't go automatically inclusion of 4 ofs because I want to be able to be a little more flexible with my deck list. So when I'm building a deck, I start with 3 research. And then after a couple rounds of testing, do I feel like a 3 is good or do I need to add more? And I do the same with Iono. I do the same with other consistency cards like Arven or Crispin. I've been falling in love with Crispin lately, but we've been doing the evolution, so I need awkward energy acceleration. Um, but there's so many other cards that can give you situational draw, and I really just try to build out from research Iono or N for those who've played a little longer, and then build around them.
Mm-hmm.
But the the difference is Iono and or N is a card that affects both players. So I need to figure out how much do I want to potentially benefit my opponent when I need to Iono? And there's been plenty of times where, yes, I've been Iono down to 1, but I've probably been Iono to 6 more often than I've ever been Iono down to 1. And
Mm-hmm.
it's one of those situations where, do you want to give your opponent more cards? And I think that is a reason why I don't like Iono as much, because it just is too much of a risk reward for my playstyle.
Yeah, and I think bringing up Iono is a good card we can talk about right now too, because comparing Iono to Professor's Research, we're discarding away resources versus Iono, we're saving those resources because you shuffle those cards in your hand, put them bottom of your deck, and then you draw for how many prize cards you have. So you're not getting rid of them; they're just going back in your deck in a different way. So sometimes that can be beneficial. Sometimes you need to play cards where you shuffle your deck, get those back, other than from the bottom of your deck. But it's just another way of, yes, it's a draw support, but it's not a draw support that gets rid of resources. It's a draw support that saves resources back into your deck.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of cards with that type of history. As you mentioned, there's N. That's a very prominent card in the expanded pull set. And from there, we also have Marnie, which kind of did the same thing as Iono, but your opponent got 4, you got 5. So those type of draw supporters are also a way to save your resources as well. So they serve two purposes.
Mm-hmm.
And as you mentioned, how important is saving those resources? How important is it for me to just get the cards I need? And also, like, how important is it to give my opponent the opportunity to save their resources? So it's a lot of questions and a lot of variability with the draw support mechanic.
Yes, and I think another card that really goes into that, it's still that sees a lot of play today, is Judge. I think the
Yes.
shuffle your hand, draw 4 for each player is the ultimate risk reward. There'd be times where Judge might be your only draw support and you need the draw because you need to put those resources back in. You just need a fresh hand. But do you give your opponent a fresh hand? Either are they struggling like you are? Do they have a low hand size where you don't want to give them more cards? Or in the opposite, they have a big hand size, they're rolling, you need to slow them down so you judge them. Like you
Hmm.
need to read the match. And that is where I think a lot of players, depending on their risk comfortability, can play those type of cards and feel differently about it. I think Judge is a really good card, but I've also played when Judge was legal for the longest time. But I also played with a card like Let Loose Marshadow. So Let Loose Marshadow was pretty much judged by the Pokemon ability,
Hmm.
and it was one of those situations where you could support and do that and still just mess your opponent up. So there was been multiple formats where Pokemon draw can be paired up with supporter draw and do a lot of different things.
Yeah, and it's as you mentioned earlier, it depends on what type of deck you're running, what is your play style. I know we mentioned this a couple times in this series. If you tend to be very aggressive, you want to pick cards that go with what your playstyle is like, because if not, you're going to have a hard time utilizing them to the full potential. If you're a little more laid back, a little more defensive, like, you got to pick the cards that work for you. And
Mm-hmm.
not saying that Professor Research and Iono, all these cards, they're great cards. There's a reason why these are in the top decks all the time. But for you, the one creating this deck, if that doesn't go with the idea you have or the playstyle that you have, by all means, find something that works for you. You need to build a deck that is leading you to success, not just take our word or a top player's advice on it. You know you better than we know you. So
Mm-hmm.
please take all this with a grain of salt. But this is just from our experience from playing for all these years. We both have been in the competitive scene. We both have gone very far in tournaments, and we're just trying to make you all the best trainers as you can be. And yeah, just knowing the resources that you have and being able to use them to your best ability. And that's all we're here for.
Yeah, and don't try to get. I would tell trainers and deck builders, don't try to get too fancy with it.
No.
Sometimes being basic with your draw support is okay. Running your 4 research, running your 4 Iono, and then running something else. That's perfectly fine. Your spice doesn't have to be in, oh, I'm gonna run a 4 of Friends of Heatweek. You don't need to run 4 of Draw 3 unless you have a deck that needs that type of synergy. You don't have to
Mm-hmm.
run 4 judges because you want. I mean, some decks want to constantly just mess with your opponent's hand size, but you don't have to just because you feel like you have to be that extra spice. You don't have to run a worker because you want to draw 3 and discard a stadium. Like, if you have stadium hate, great. Or you have cards that need stadiums in the discard pile. Like if you're running a Rotom or something like that, great. But you have to look into those synergies and just know that draw support is your consistency engine. And you
Mm-hmm.
have to make sure that game in, game out, you are getting what you need when you need it. And you are analyzing that risk with those shuffle cards. And if you don't want to play shuffle cards, you don't have to. There's plenty of draw support out there. And there's a lot of different cards that will benefit different board states as well. So definitely when you are picking your draw support, I would go your research, your Iono, your consistency supporters, and then see what else you could add on that makes sense to the rest of the strategy. And it's not, like I said, it's not bad. You don't have to be creative. Don't try to overthink it. If you find that niche, great, but don't try to. It's You want the niche to be the Pokemon cards. You want the other aspects of your decks to shine if you're able to do it. Because it's great to have a good idea, but if you can't draw into the cards you need, that idea means nothing.
Exactly. And I think a really good example was something I actually saw today watching a stream. And it was a Tingaton deck. And it relies on draw support. So that's actually a very good example for this topic. But it kept on running Nemona. It's like, well, that's interesting. It's just a draw 3. You think drawing something else would be more beneficial. But then he used Nemona's backpack, which meant you can recycle your Nemonas. And it's like, if you can find a synergy like that, that makes sense for that deck, by all means, go for it. But don't use the Nemona's backpack mechanic in a deck that doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
Know what you're doing. Be comfortable with using something interesting. Like, don't, like, it's fine to experiment, but I think being consistent is more important in the beginning stages of building a deck. One of the top players, if not the top player of all time, is Tor Recklib, and if you look at his decks, they are consistent as they can be. He plays a lot of 4 ofs or 3 ofs of whatever card, and a lot of it is the draw support because he knows he needs his resources.
mm-hmm.
So know what you're doing. Be consistent. Start off with a 3 or 4 of something, and like you said, don't be looking for something special right up front. Get the core mechanic down first, and as you see fit, find different cards that will go with that your mechanic.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, I think it's a really good point to transition to the deck of the week. I was talking about this deck with you off stream for about 2 weeks before actually getting it into where I was happy with over the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And talking about consistency, I think this list is a super consistent list when it comes to how I built through my kind of my thought process, I guess, for lack of better terms.
Mm-hmm.
So this deck doesn't run a lot of draw support. I'm gonna be completely honest with you. This
You have like six definite draw supports, but you can argue 5 more of those are draw support too.
Yeah, no, and it runs like I think it goes back to the beginning of our conversation, right? This deck is I went with a core 3/3 and then I built around it and I wasn't trying to just blow through my deck. I wanted to make sure my deck ran efficiently and felt comfortable. And my draw support reflects that because the way the deck wants to run. So the deck
Mhm.
I'm talking about is Espeon EX. So Espeon EX, for those who do not know, is a card that came out in Prismatic Evolutions. It is a 270 HP Psychic type EX Pokemon that's Terra as well. Evolves from Eevee or Eevee EX.
Mhm.
And it has 2 attacks. The first one is Psych Out for a Psychic double colorless. And it does 160 and discard a random card from your opponent's hand. The second attack is a Maze, and it's Grass Psychic Dark, and de-evolve each of your opponent's evolved Pokemon by shuffling the highest stage evolution card into their deck. So, really,
Mhm.
my approach for this, when I was looking at this card, is I need to spread damage. I need to put damage where I want it to be. And then I need at the same time to be able to build up my board, but also get the energies I need onto my Espeon in order
Mhm.
to get the Devolution attack to go off. Now, the rest of the deck, we'll kind of go run through it real quick. The deck list will be in the show notes. So if I'm running a little too quickly, definitely you'll see it in the show notes. So this deck runs a 4 of Eevee with the colorful catch attack. It's 70 HP as well. So I opted not to do the Eevee with the evolution. You'll see why in a second. And then from those 4 Eevee, I run the 2 Espeon EX, and then I run 1 baby Espeon. And the baby Espeon is a stage 1 psychic Pokemon for 110 HP. And it has the attack Psychic Assault for a single psychic energy that's 30, and then 10 more for every damage counter on the opponent's active Pokemon. So again, I built a little bit more synergy on the placement of damage counters with that evolution
Mhm.
branch. And then the rest of the deck is a 2/2 line of Froslass. So I definitely do not like abilities. Froslass is a card that has Freezing Shroud. During checkup, you may put 1 damage counter on each Pokemon that has an ability, both yours and your opponent's, except for any Froslass. So, as you've heard right now, I haven't had really played any Pokemon with abilities. I want to punish my opponent without punishing myself.
Mhm.
But I do run 3 Munkidori. I do need some other way of getting damage onto my opponent's board, and I'm using the Munkidori for that. And then the last attacker, or the last Pokemon on this list is Uxie. For a single Psychic Energy, I can put 2 damage counters on each of my opponent's Pokemon. So my strategy is set up my board, set up multiple lines of evolutions, and then just take advantage of a whole bunch of damage counters on the board. So the draw
Yeah.
support definitely is more consistent based because I need to be able to pump all those different lines turn in, turn out.
Yeah, and I remember us talking about this when we first realized what Espeon EX did. We initially thought, okay, we need to build a spread deck, and you really wanted to do it because that's kind of your favorite style of decks to play is spread.
Yeah.
That is your MO. You actually won, if not tied top at first place at a major GLC tournament playing Psychic Spread. So this
hmm
is what definitely up your alley. And as you look at the Pokemon lineup that we have in this, you really don't need a lot. So
Nope.
as we mentioned, we with draw support wise, we just have to really get the initial setup and then we can go from there. So when you said like, "Oh, I don't really play a lot of draw support," this is the theory crafting, the critical thinking we're talking about. We can get away with just doing 3 research and 3 Iono, just get what we need and just be okay with the slow play, no, not slow play, but playing methodical, not rushing, controlling the tempo of the
hmm
match by just spreading the damage and playing more or less a single prize board state other than the Espeon EX. So it's interesting how like you took like, okay, this is the concept I want. What is the draw support that best fits what I want to go for? And you did that perfectly here and you tweaked it. And with how you did with your matches, you're telling me like, I wish I can build this something similar to this in real life. This felt really smooth.
Yeah, and like you said, it fits a playstyle of mine. My first ever deck was Trevenant Break, so that was just spread and item lock, and then the DLC deck I have is Psychic Spread, just because I love spread damage. I love just damage counter manipulation. So I wasn't even thinking this as a damage counter manipulation deck at first. I was thinking, I'm like, how can I just be run shenanigans with Devolution? And it turned into damage manipulation that just happens to benefit Devolution.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the a spec of choice for this deck is Hyper Aroma, so it allows me to, if I can't do my turn one play of choice, which is attach an energy to any of my Pokemon, attach TM, Technical Machine Evolution, to evolve two of my bench, I can just Hyper Aroma a whole bunch of stage ones in my hand the next turn and just put a whole bunch of stage ones on turn two. So there's a whole bunch of different ways to get to my board state by turn two. There's obviously the preferred way, which is TM Evolution, which is paired with Arven. Like I run 3 Arven just so I can make sure that happens turn one. And with the rest of the deck just being so self-sufficient, like after turn one, I'm really not trying to put Pokemon into play because ideally I have 4 to 5 of I have my board set up and I'm just kind of pushing the agenda of spread, 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 and all the attackers except for Espeon EX are super low energy. And I say that the Psychic Espeon is 1 psychic energy, Uxie is 1 psychic energy. You never attack with Munkidori, you never attack with Froslass.
Mm-hmm.
So you have 2 baby attackers, and then you just pump your Espeons, and that's it.
Yeah. I haven't really dealt with the spread archetype that much, but you were explaining this to me. It was like it's very easy. It's very low maintenance once you get set up. I'm excited to see how you all, the listeners, think of this list. Uh, as you were playing your games, how did it felt for you? I know you said you really enjoyed doing this process and doing the recording matches. So tell us how you felt playing, what was going through your mind when you're playing this list, and well, were there any adjustments to the deck building process as you were going through this week with Espeon?
Yeah, so initially I wanted to play Radiant Alakazam with the list because on paper Radiant Alakazam sounds like it's the best Radiant for the deck. Um, but as I was playing it and I was playing it with Froslass, I was like, oh, Radiant Alakazam's just gonna die because I'm killing my own Radiant Alakazam. And Radiant Alakazam doesn't manipulate the damage counters the way you would like it to be. Like it's moved 2 damage counters from one Pokemon to another. Sounds cool, doesn't do enough. So
Yeah.
then I cut that. I initially actually had some Badoo in the list, and it just like doesn't feel good. The item lock's great, but don't need it. Don't need a 30, and to me, you don't need a 30 HP liability. So I cut that from the list. I didn't have any energy search at first that was item based. And as I was cutting the Pokemon out, I'm like, all right, let me add an Earthen Vessel. Let me add more, let me add 2 Earthen Vessels. I had a lot more TM Evolution Devolution because I was really going for the de-evolve strategy, and I cut that back to I have 1 TM devolve, 1 TM evolve, 1 TM turbo energizer. And I felt super comfortable because I wanted my turn one strategy to be set up my board.
Mm-hmm.
And even if I had a turbo energizer onto a benched Eevee to get an Espeon online turn one, I didn't feel bad doing that. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
have to, but I didn't feel bad doing it. So there was a whole bunch of different routes I could take based on the opponent I was seeing. Um, During my initial testing, I was testing against decks without abilities because the one thing I do love on live is the testing mechanism it has because you're not testing against the same deck over and over again. You're testing against a random pool of decks. So I was able to see how this deck ran against evolution decks, against item based or ability based decks, and a decks that didn't really run abilities but was super aggressive. So I had to kind of adjust to that strategy as I was building my deck. So it
Mm-hmm.
was super interesting to see the evolution over an afternoon with my initial thought of the 60 versus what the 60 was for the actual video.
Yeah, and that's I know we've had a lot of conversations about this deck, and at the end of it, you're like, yeah, I really love this. Like, for the most part, this is rotation proof. I think I'm looking at the list. The only two cards that rotate are the Iridas, which, yes, is impactful, but I feel like we can find options to replace those Iridas to make this deck work.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
It's the Iridas and then the Snorunt, but you can just switch to Snorunt.
yeah,
So that the Snorunt is rotation proof, but it's not. Like the collect Snorunt is okay if you're in a jam, but if you're attacking with Snorunt, you're already in a bad spot anyway.
yeah. So it doesn't matter which one you play at
Yeah.
that
So the
point.
two Irida is really the biggest cards in this deck that will fall off of rotation, but I think the Irida is more of a luxury card than a need because it's get a water Pokemon and then get an item.
Hmm.
You're really just using it to get the Froslass if you couldn't get it any other way. And I'm sure that supporter slot can get transformed into either another supporter or just a better item. So this is a
Hmm.
deck that I could be convinced very easily to drop the Espeon EX itself and just make it into a damage spread single prize deck where maybe you run a 4-3 of just the baby Espeon, and then you don't even worry about the complicated energy on Espeon EX, and just run damage, evolve, and then devolution just as a late game sweep situation. So there's a lot of ways that this deck can even just grow over time, but in its current 60, I would actually love to take this to a challenge or a cup and see what happens with real people, because I think
Hmm.
it's streamlined enough to do really well in a best of one scenario, and it's also one of those situations where there's pieces in it that a lot of players will know about, but they won't be able to see the full picture until everything's on the board at the same time.
Yeah, and it's a type of deck that people don't necessarily see a lot, so they may not be totally prepared for, or at least know how to do it right away.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm excited to see how our listeners enjoy this. I know you recorded your matches and had a really fun time.
Mm-hmm.
So that will be coming out tomorrow, Friday, the day after this podcast is published. So go ahead, take a look on our YouTube channel, like, subscribe to it, and let us know what you think of this deck. I guess the last question I have is, since this is a different style of playing, the going the spread route, what advice do you have for players that haven't done this type of deck before?
To me, is you have to have patience. You have to like playing a game of chess in order to like playing spread, because there's going to be times where it doesn't look like you're setting up your win con, but you are. It's going to be, yes, you may have 6 damage counters everywhere. Like every Pokemon may have 60 damage, and that doesn't look like you've done a lot. But 60 times 5 is 300 damage on the board.
Hmm.
So you have to be able to just watch those numbers grow. You have to be able to be patient with it. And you're going to have to make sure that you just repeat what you're doing over and over again. The one thing I love about spread decks is that the strategy is fairly linear. It's just slower. It's exponential growth, not just punch you in the mouth. So depending on how you build your spread, like my GLC deck, I put a whole bunch of damage on the board. Like every Pokemon's probably at 6 to 7 damage counters, which won't kill a lot of Pokemon. And then I have a Lunala that I just slam down as a stage 2, be like 2 energy attached to it, double all your counters, and then all their Pokemon go pop.
Yeah.
So being able to do that, and I think the Espeon, the baby Espeon, does that. Like, okay, you have 6 damage counters on it. You're 60 damage. I'm gonna Psychic Assault now for 90. Most Pokemon are just gonna you slowly ramp up that damage by setting up long-term plays. So that's what I would advise someone if they want to play a spread deck. Be very much a long-term player. You have to be able to thrive in that mid to late game more than in the early game.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I for me that's something I would like to improve on. Use I like playing those beat stick decks.
Hmm.
That's something you and me actually talked about. My preferred style is OTK by Can. I used to be very defensive, but I haven't been able to play those type of decks in a while. So, but yeah, um, let us know what you think of the Espeon EX deck. Devin enjoyed it. It's been nice to hear from his experience throughout the week. So be on the lookout for that video. Um, Before we head out, Devin, any final words for today's episode?
No, I would say be willing to just grab a random card and try to build around it. I think that's really what this whole mini series of the evolutions have been all about. I had no idea what Espeon EX did this time last week, and I just sat on it for a week. I thought about it and I theory crafted it, and then I executed it, and I ended up finding a card that I really did enjoy playing. So I think that's all about this process that we've been talking about, and I hope everyone experiments with different cards. And it doesn't have to be a card that's already out. If you see a card when a leak happens or when an official debut happens, and you just want to think about it and marinate on it, have fun with it. Don't wait for
Mm-hmm.
someone else to do it. Just do it yourself.
And I know we've been doing that with some of the Journey Together cards. You and me have been talking about other decks that we're excited to build that we can't build yet. Um, but yeah, I think that's great advice. Just take a card and just do your research and see how you can make it a fully functioning deck. Now, it may not necessarily be like a top meta deck, but as long as you have fun with it, that's all that matters.
Yep. And you'd be surprised what it can do against the meta once you put the time and effort into them.
Exactly. Well, that is this week's episode of the Rogue Deck Chronicles. Thank you for listening. I hope y'all enjoy your Pokemon Day. Let us know what y'all did to celebrate Pokemon Day. What y'all think of the direct that's going to happen. Anything exciting you have to celebrate this franchise? Let us know. We want to celebrate with y'all. But until then, we'll see you next week and have fun playing those sneaky decks.
Bye, guys.